Welcome to And It's Live, the podcast which dives deep into football's most iconic seasons, stories, and what ifs. If you love football, history, tactics, and nostalgia, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and drop us a like on YouTube so you don't miss an episode. Hello and welcome to And It's Live, the history of the Premier League. I'm Martin Ramsey, your host as ever. It is the winter of discontent, maybe not, but certainly scandal, controversy, and absolutely sensational storylines in Premier League history. It is 94-95. Adam's still not with us, hopefully be back soon, but David is. And my word, David, a show of two halves, I think, at least tonight, maybe even 1/3 football at the end, because there's just so much stuff off the pitch to really get through. And then we'll take a temperature check on the title races that kind of meandered through the winter until certainly one very famous night at Selhurst Park that we will finish with. Welcome. First of all, how many podcasts have we done over the years, David? And I still feel there's a necessity to have that kind of formality. But how are you doing, my man?
I'm good, thank you. No, it's always polite, and you and I are nothing if not sticklers for good old British Reserve. I've just realised that the way that it looks now, Adam has got his fancy new circle screens, but my name and the T-shirt I've chosen makes me look as I'm paying tribute to a Liverpool goalkeeper of the 90s, and I'm not. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this because I going through, there are some great memories, obviously, but the Cole transfer, I'm still not sure how I feel about this 30 years later. I'm still not sure. So I'm actually in a cathartic way, almost like it's almost going to be like, sitting down and you'll be like a therapist saying to me, and what do you think that means, David?
Yeah.
Because it was so, at the time, so like stop in your tracks, pick up a paper, and we'll get to it. And that's before we even get, in my opinion, the greatest ever moment of fan interaction in the history of English Premier League, which I will expound on later.
There's just so much to get through. And November is where we're going to pick it up. November 1994. David, did you or did you not buy a national lottery ticket in that first ever weekend?
The reason I remember it so vividly is it was the day before my birthday that they were launching it, the Saturday. So I can tell it was Saturday, 19th November, and that's how I know that. And I was actually at a concert in Glasgow at the Barrowlands on the Saturday night, and beforehand was in the pub, as one did, as was the style at the time, before a concert. And what was funny was the draw was live on the television of the hostelry I was in, and literally every person in that bar had their ticket out, and we all believed we were going to win, because I don't think that the odds of, what was it, like 18 million to 1 had quite got through yet. Everybody thought they were in with a shout of getting it, but I think the most in that room that night was 3 numbers and a tenner.
Yeah, not quite a nation of statisticians at that point, I think it's probably fair to say. Anyway, as I said, we'll get to the football much later, I think, in the show. We talk even now, David, about modern football, managerial merry-go-rounds, managers don't get it. This, I'm not sure we've seen the likes of November, December 1994. Ozzy Ardila sacked. That was happening the last time you listened, as was Mike Walker at Everton, rock bottom of the Premier League. Ron Atkinson, after being defeated at Wimbledon, giving it big talk that, yep, this is rubbish, but you come back to me in a few months, I'm sure you'll see a different Villa. Possibly, but with a different manager. He was sacked. Jerry Francis and his hair walk away from QPR, because I think Rodney Marsh had kind of been brought in with this slight sense that he was maybe going to be a kind of overseer. He was sat in the stand. Jerry Francis had no knowledge of it, did not fancy that at all. QPR doing quite well. Anyway, see you after we're done. Brian Little resigns at Leicester because he fancies
Something
a shot
bigger
at
is
this other
coming.
job, which she will get. Ray Wilkins leaves Crystal Palace to take up QPR. Jerry Francis and his hair rock up at White Hart Lane eventually. And Everton go back to an old boy, Joe Royle, coming back to the club to try and save them. John Lyall leaves Ipswich after quite a few years. Their former player, George Burley, comes back, a move that would work out quite well. And finally, Mark McGee taking over Brian Little's position at Leicester. I mean, I'm exhausted just going through the various ins and outs. I'm sure someone will let us know if there's been a period of 8 to 10 weeks in Premier League history quite like that, but I would be surprised. This was, perfect storm, combination of events, just clubs. Again, we'll go back to that point we made last week, David. 4 go down this season because they're going to make that change 2 to 20. So the pressure is perhaps very different this season than maybe any others. Any there that you want to pick out? I'll start you off. The option of Joe Royle, which kind of made sense after the work he'd been doing at.
Yeah, there was a sense with Joe Royle that he was an Everton manager in waiting when he was at Oldham. I think that it was almost seen as a sort of apprenticeship. And Everton had great success in the past with Howard Kendall, with Colin Harvey. A lot of people forget Colin Harvey won a title with Everton. And it seemed a very natural fit, especially after having someone who a regular complaint was he doesn't understand the club. And I do think it was fair in that instance, actually. I don't think he did. I don't think he quite got where he was in the game and the size of the club he was taking over. And I think that
Everton they had to allow him the chance to learn, right? I mean, he was such a hot prospect, as we've discussed.
He was.
This isn't retrospective.
On paper, it's a good appointment. Yeah, on paper, it's a good appointment. The problem is, I think he arrived thinking they're lucky to have got me, whereas Everton were thinking you are not lucky to have the job, but you've earned a crack at it. You're not. We're not. This was not the Man City announcing Pep. So I think there was that disconnect at the start. Of the other ones, there's so many interesting ones there. Big Ron, I think, felt a little hard done to Martin. And being Big Ron, he told us this repeatedly on many platforms, as I believe the kids call them now. But he probably did have a little bit of a shout in that regard. He'd done a lot for that club, I thought. But football, it is not loyal. It's one of the biggest oxymorons in the game. When you hear people talk about loyalty, fans are loyal, nobody else is. But there were some other interesting moves here. The George Burley one I'd like to pick out actually because my father, his friend, his son played for Ayr United in Scottish Division 1 as it was at the time, Championship now. And when my team were not playing, I would go and watch because I got in for free. So, that's quite good. And George Burley was actually the Ayr United manager. And we didn't think he was very good. And then he pops up. He hadn't particularly impressed at this level. And to see him pop up there was, and even now, I know it looks ludicrous, a guy going from an unsuccessful spell in the Scottish part-time leagues to being the manager, ex-player and coach there, of course. But even now, clubs would look at that, I think, almost aesthetically and say, no one will buy this. We can't quite do this yet. But it was a slightly different, it was a hugely different.
Would that be harder, David, than coming from no managerial record whatsoever if you are a famous son and you've absolutely paid your dues there, many years there, well thought of, well loved? If you've done fuck all in the game as a manager, is that easier than maybe starting a coaching journey in the lower reaches of the Football League or in another country? Does it almost kind of spoil the wrapping and the freshness of giving a famous player, an ex-player, a shot immediately?
Yeah, absolutely. It's perception, isn't it? It's, wait a minute, he was at Ayr. an heir. Why are we taking someone from them? And I understand that. Can you imagine even now Ipswich in the Championship are not taking a manager from Ayr United? So I get that, and I think you're absolutely right, because if with someone who comes in who's a club legend and has been coaching at the club as well, usually that's generally the thing. They take a step up, don't they? Then I think you can project onto them. So that buys them that honeymoon period, and if they start well, it'll continue. So no, I think you're spot on there to do that. But I was really interested in that. McGee, what I remember at the time was immediately everybody saying, if he does well, Man United. That straight away, that Aberdeen connection. Yeah. If he does well, Man United, and we would see it again, and we'll talk about it with Steve Bruce and various other managers at the time. Not that anybody thought Ferguson was imminently going to go, but just Man United are the talk of the town. They're the biggest club in certainly Britain at this point. They sell newspapers. They sell, so any story, we call it clickbait now, but it existed back then. If you could get a Man United story crowbarred in on a quiet day, so could he be a future Manchester United manager, would sell papers? I'm not sure anybody believed it more strongly than the man himself, who has a good claim in a congested field of excellence as possibly being the most deluded football manager with regards to his own abilities of all time. And we'll prove that throughout this show repeatedly. But yeah, at the time he was considered quite young and quite a hot young manager. People forget with McGee, because he has become such a ridiculous figure over the years, that he had a very stellar playing career, Martin.
Absolutely,
including spell abroad, successful squad in the Bundesliga. And he did have assurance, he does have assurance, sometimes in the face of all logic. And he conveyed that. I think there was a sense that you mentioned a couple of the clubs there. I think there was a sense, particularly at QPR, of unhappy fans, because Francis and his hair had been doing so well there, that they sort of felt, are you moving him out? Are you forcing him out the door? Whereas the sense at Leicester with Brian Little was, I can't believe you're doing this to us. Villa aren't a bigger club than us. Now, they palpably were and are, in my opinion, but certainly then they were. But I think but you've said this on this show and in other shows we've done together, football fans think that officials that they like and players that they like are like their partner and should stay with them in sickness and in health. Players they don't like and managers they don't like don't qualify for that. But we take it personally, we take it as a rejection. But the sense that QPR was, this is our fault and we're going to blame you for this, rather than the person. The sense at Leicester was, how could you do this to us?
Yeah. What I meant earlier with QPR weren't doing that badly. They were hovering above that. In fact, sometimes in the autumn, that four team group, I don't get the sense that the fans were desperate for the managers to get his jotters. So it's, Francis had a position of power there, certainly with the public, but clearly those who ran the club had maybe slightly other ideas. This isn't me just being retrospective on a retrospective show, David, but did not think Brian Little ever had the charisma and the stature to be manager of a club like Aston Villa. Very much nominative determinism in terms of the kind of presence that he had. Clearly a good coach because he was doing good things with Leicester. I think that was a fit. Clearly affection and a history with the club. But is it just because he's coming after Big Ron? I don't know. But I just never really bought that.
Well, if you look at Villa's run through it this decade, say 88 to 2000, we'll start the decade a couple of years earlier. You've got Graham Taylor, big personality. Not the same personality as Big Ron, but personalities come in different types. They can still be big. Graham Taylor's a big personality. Ron Atkinson, big personality, a different way. John Gregory will come in. Big personality. John Gregory was not shy of a word or two and did have a presence. Brian Little's the opposite to that. He's intelligent. He is. I remember seeing him interviewed on the TV after as well, and I was really impressed, Martin. Just a thinker about football and eloquent and able to get that across. But I think of Villa, and it's maybe an age thing, and it's become easier the last few years as we record. But I think of Villa as a big club because they have a huge support. They're the biggest club in Britain, second biggest city. They have history. They have all the things that we old school football fans like. And I've always felt Villa were a big club. But at this point, Villa are a side that every year I look at the odds during this period as should they be my dark horse for my tenner for the league. So I thought Little was a little bit unimaginative. I felt it was a little safe. And again, it's that thing that you can put across. Would they be getting the job if they hadn't represented the club as well as they did? I think that's unfair in much the same way as I think it's unfair with Joe Royle. But I'm not 100% sure Joe Royle gets that Everton job for the job he's done at Oldham alone.
Well, this is the thing, though. It's more meritocratic time, perhaps, because Brian Little he'd done his job at Leicester,
and well,
he's therefore in line for a next move. Joe Royle had punched well above his weight at Oldham, and therefore was due that next one, and all of that makes sense. It's just I'm not sure that necessarily happens anymore because of the gulf between, we're seeing it just now, right? Thomas Frank, for example, others who have absolutely done everything they can possibly do at a particular tier, and then maybe finding life just that wee bit more difficult with other expectations and everything else. Should be said, Brian Little was fine at Villa. I think
he was not a
decent few years. European qualification, I'm sure, for a few. It just, they had challenged for the title, right? Not that long before, and it just felt.
And they're back in that mix. And when Gregory comes in, they go back into that. Like, maybe it's just a certain type of figure. We've discussed this about our own club many times. A certain type of figure is required for a certain type of club. I don't think that's a crazy thing to suggest. I think personality is important for certain clubs. At Villa at this point, you're still dealing with Deadly Doug as well.
Yeah, well, who vehemently denied that he broke any of the tapping up rules that
he just happened to design that day.
The Premier League had only in draft, Doug was keen to point out, wasn't yet legislative. However, he still abided by. It's so draconian, tapping up, phoning someone and saying, "Are you interested in a new job?" As if that doesn't happen to anybody in the working world. This weird thing that we have about offering contracts and new opportunities to people in football that is just absolute normal business elsewhere. Anyway, as I said, huge amount of managerial change there. Then we get into some of the chicanery. We've already talked about this, Dave, so we'll maybe not lean too heavily on it, but this is when the Grobbelaar and Hans Seegers and John Fashanu stuff comes to the public knowledge, and in terms of their willingness to accept money to influence the results of football matches. We know that they will be acquitted at court. We know that there are some issues perhaps about that judgment and some of the conclusions drawn, but that's the way of the law. And Graham Kelly came out very dismissive. He's just a very dismissive man, wasn't he, Graham Kelly? Chief exec of the FA at the time, and Southampton didn't really care because Grobbelaar's at Southampton by this point. And now we're just going to play him because we've got every faith, and rightly so. He did a fine job immediately after all this kind of came to light. A great game against Arsenal, I think, clean sheet. So that's murky. but we have kind of touched on that already. We'll come to other murky financial dealings in a minute. Paul Merson, David, wheeled out in front of the cameras to pretty much bare himself in front of the nation's media in terms of his addiction to alcohol, to cocaine, to gambling, that he was basically going to go and dry out somewhere, still able to keep fit, but not being with the Arsenal squad, not training, not being part, not available for selection. This, I guess the scandal of it all tempered quite a lot, even by mid-90s standards, by that mea culpa and that opening up and the tears. And yeah, that felt a bit of a watershed moment.
Yeah. Now we can debate. I'll declare an interest in this just for any listeners. I'm a recovered alcoholic, so I have I've been sober for 16 years, so I have intense empathy for what Paul Merson went through. So I should probably make that clear at the start. And initially, your gut reaction is, I can't believe they made him do that. But you mentioned that the press would not have left him alone had they not. What this did was, as uncomfortable as it is to watch, it was then, it is now. As uncomfortable as it is to watch, what it did was it bought him the space to go off and recover because, as you say, he's admitted there's no scandal to be hidden away there. And the press at this time are vicious, even more so than they are, a lot more than they are now. What I will say is, on a human level, see when you first come to your decision that you can't do this anymore, you can't live this way, you are in your mind at the lowest point you will ever be at in your life, genuinely. And I don't say that lowly. And I've gone through bereavement and illness and whatnot. It is the lowest you will ever be in your life because of the amount of, you feel you've let everybody down. You are confused as to why you can't do this thing that everybody else seems to manage okay with. As a man, particularly of that age, and this is not right, but it's big and it's powerful and it exists, you feel you should somehow, it's unmanly to do that if you come from like a working class background. And you also think, right, that's my life over, because you've lived this way for so long. It's all you do, really. It's what you focus on. It is your thought. And I know that people who don't have addictions might find that hard to believe. But even if when you get up and you're functioning, when he's going to training or when I was going to work, what you do is you get up and you go, right, okay, I need to get ready, go into work, finish at 5, I'll be in the boozer for 5:30, right? Or I'll be able to get whatever it is that your addiction is, right? That's your thought process. You go to work to earn money to drink, right? If you go to a night out, or you right, do I have drink in the house for when I come back? I need to stand at the bar at this concert, all of that, right? Your life isn't, and then suddenly it's gone. And what's left is wow, nothing. I need to live like a monk forever. So the situation he was in, Martin, I had to do that. And you are encouraged in recovery to share this, not to hide it, because it's nothing to be ashamed about. And I want to stress that in case anybody who's watching is going through something similar. It's nothing to be ashamed about, but you are ashamed. And to do it to your friends and family is difficult enough. It's the hardest conversations I've ever had in my life. To do it to the nation and to football supporters who feel they own you, I think totally takes an incredible amount of gumption, strength, and I think that you can have your opinions on Paul Merton, the pundit. You can have your opinions on Paul Merson, the footballer. Paul Merton was not a pundit. That would be great, but he isn't. Paul Merson, the footballer. Paul Merson, the pundit. I think he was a tremendous footballer. We could do
a lot of more surrealism, I think.
I would watch that. I absolutely would if Paul Merton did that. But I think that was an incredibly brave thing to do. And then he's spoken about it, been an advocate for it, and make no mistake, he'll have helped people doing that. So I think he deserves a bit of credit for that. The media, because of that, I do not believe they would have done this otherwise. I think it would have been lumped in with, oh, the scandal, this rotten game. But they couldn't really do that because there was public sympathy for Merson because he had fessed up to it. And I think this was an early stage of, yes, they have money, not quite as much money, incidentally, as they have now. There is a gap at this point between the ordinary working person and footballs, but it's not like it is now. But that they are human. And this is a very human thing he is going through. This is something that will have touched, unfortunately, a lot of families and a lot of people. Most people will know of or know someone who's been affected by it. So I have nothing but respect for him to do it and for the way that he turned his life about, because it isn't easy and not everybody manages it, sadly. But what it did do was it was a sign, I think, Martin, if we need to analyse this and, maybe a little bit coldly, is what we do on this show, of PR in football becoming a thing. Because Paul Merson has not decided, he's not walked into Arsenal and went, call a press conference, lads, I want to get this off my chest. This has been, how do we present this? 5 years before that doesn't happen. 10 years before it doesn't, it certainly doesn't happen. And instead, Arsenal are, right, how do we handle this? And I have to say this about Arsenal, and people can talk, but particularly this era Arsenal, they did handle things in a classy way. When it came to, the upper reaches at Arsenal were very, they were very old school, but they did handle it well, and they gave him space, and they gave him room, and they gave him sympathy. But there was this sense of they can't go after Merson personally now because he's fessed up and now he's in recovery. You have to be kind of sympathetic towards it, or at least make a show of that in the papers. Although I remember a few columnists, you can imagine. But I think the thing about it was there was a sense of, look at these out of control football. It's all about money with them now. It's not the people's game. Sky are in. There was a lot of Wither Alba at this, Wither Albion, rather. Yeah, that's up here. Wither Albion going on about it. But that's because you're in a period of intense change. And if it hadn't been this, it would have been something else. What I will say is, it's so interesting looking back that there's no doubt in my mind that the Premier League is a seismic shift of the tectonic plates in football. And now all of this is happening because it isn't settling. 22 teams in the league, 4 are going down, managers going left, right and centre, shining a light on things that maybe used to go on in football. I think we'd be naive to say that it has never, ever happened. Certainly in Italy it's happened. We know this. And PR coming into football, players fessing up to an addiction because in the old, how many old school footballers, 70s and 80s, went to training, went to the pub and had drink problems, but managed them, right? Things are changing. And I just think it's the start of the Premier League is a seismic shock. And Martin, the pieces have not landed yet.
No, they haven't. And it's interesting talking about the PR handling of it. Paul Merson's there. These are not crocodile tears. They're dripping from his face. But some of it's handled by David Davis, who is now the Director of Communications at the FA. So again, Arsenal have worked with the governing body and their guy. David Davis used to be of BBC and BBC News. And do you know what he's most famous for, David, in his role of covering the sports news on a Saturday night and News at 10 or whatever, News at 9?
No, and I've read his book as
well.
If you
don't want to know the score, look away now. That's a David Davis.
Was that a David Davis innovation?
Yeah.
I am one of the few people who have actually read his book about his time at the FA.
Fascinating character,
biggest takeaway from it, Sven-Göran Eriksson was fond of sexual intercourse. There you go.
You heard it here first, ladies
There
and
you
gentlemen.
go. Yeah, you weren't expecting that, were you?
But Arsenal, they're using that very clearly.
Yeah.
You know, probably the best guy in the business. Slightly tangentially, but not so much later in the season. But it's probably worth bracketing it in here. Chris Armstrong is done for cannabis use. First Premier League player to be, has been technically done for doping. I'm not entirely sure. That's the proper use of that phrase when it comes to sport and performance. But anyway, that again, football life, this crossover with the kind of culture that's starting to become very much mainstream, and it's all kind of coming together. We will take a break now, after which some transfer talk, both new and historical. Welcome back. This is part 2 of episode 3 of 1994-95, and our look back at the history of the Premier League. David, Arsenal not without their problems to seek off the field, and incredibly, their manager appears to have done something far more unseemly than just have incredible addiction problems, because he's now very much embroiled in a financial scandal. This related back to the signing mainly of John Jensen back in 1992. We discussed this on one of our opening shows, and he effectively took £425,000 from the player's agent, Rooney Haig, I think. So that comes out, and the press have a bit of a field day with this, and he is very clear. I think it's at Main Road. Arsenal go and they win. They're actually very good. One of the few times in the league that season that they are. And he says, the only thing I'm going to say on it is I have never profited from a deal, and that's that. He will still say that it was unsolicited. It was not part. So I guess the illusion and the inference and the allegation, in fact, is if you sign John Jensen, and I think there was another Danish player at the time as a bit of a deal, I will give you, or you will get as part of this transfer, this bung. It's an incentive to do the deal. And Graham denies that. It was unsolicited. It was effectively a gift. He'd worked with Haig before, blah, 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 blah. The money resting in my account, whatever. But it was not part of that deal. And, well, tough. Arsenal eventually caved. I mean, this goes on for quite a while. So Arsenal ultimately don't buy it. They sack him after he makes those signings in the end of February. And the FA have a hearing in the summer, I think the May or the June, and they don't buy that story either. He's banned for a year. Then he turns up at Elland Road, incredibly weirdly turns up at White Hart Lane for a wee while, actually, doesn't he? But I've always felt two things, really. Even if his account is not true, and quite clearly there's been an inducement and blah blah blah, and he's broken the rules. What a waste of a managerial career. We talked about the other a few episodes ago, maybe turning into a different kind of manager, maybe lacking that consistency and depth to challenge for a title again. But they're still very much in the Cup Winners' Cup. They will go nearly all the way again. Spoiler alert, it's Stuart Houston that takes over on a kind of temporary basis. But I just wonder what that career looks like, David. It's one of the more interesting what ifs in this era. And also, I can imagine George Graham's real annoyance and grudge is that there is not a chance in hell that he was the only one involved in these kind of situations and arrangements at the time, contemporaneously after that, but for decades before. In fact, some of the leading legends of English football management are exactly the same.
Him and Clough get done with it. And there is no doubt, first of all, that they did it. And they are big names. But then you can use that to say, we've investigated it. Here are two massive names. So it's not like we've just gone after. But Clough's at the game at this point. And they've gone after Graham if Arsenal 3 years before. Would Arsenal have fought them on it? That's the thing. And Graham certainly does feel he's the only one, along with Clough, but as I say, he was out the game, that got the reputation besmirched again to draw a line under it. That was then, that was old, this is now. Look, we've investigated it. Yes, it happened. We've moved on. There is no way in hell that he is the only person that happened with. There is no way in hell there hasn't been a culture in football of that. I believe that it still does happen. Now, his line is frankly not believable. I'm not saying managers do it, by the way, but there's no doubt in football that it happens still. That inducements are made to players and clubs and by agents. There is zero doubt about it in my mind. I think we can all point to transfers, but we can't think that's iffy. The defence doesn't stack up. He just happened to give me 425 grand because he liked me a lot is essentially the defence here. It does not pass the smell test. There is nothing in writing. He said, well, yes, I would, to quote Blackadder, the criminal always makes a mistake. His mistake was writing down his entire conspiracy and having it printed. Yeah. So, we wouldn't expect that to happen, George. But I think two things can be true at the same time. One, they did use him as a scapegoat to clear the decks and move on. And two, he did it. And these things can be true at the same time. Also, Martin, as you will know better than me, Tukokwe is not a defence that any court will accept. Right, you cannot go into court and say, but they were doing it too, and the judge will let you off. It doesn't work like that in any court in the world.
But you can fizz about it in the dark, listening to the
for years. For years. Well, the other point you made, first of all, I just want to say I sincerely hope that when Stuart Houston get called in the day of George Graham's sacking, that David Dean started by saying, Houston, we have a problem, because he never would have been more apt to do so. But that
film had just been out, so you would really hope that that's still resonant culturally through North
Great
London.
Movie, absolutely, Ron Howard. But I think that if you were doing a movie on George Graham's life, you end it here. So while I'm sure he's proud of his subsequent spell at Leeds, he started off what would go into being quite a good team and in fact bequeathed them David O'Leary, whose babbies we'll talk about when the time comes. And he did okay at Tottenham as well. But thematically, it doesn't feel, does it? It doesn't feel like it fits the story. George Graham, 1989, 1990, 1991, bestrides the English game like a sharply suited colossus, right? But this is an insight into how obsessed with money, how worried about money, how obsessed with financial security managers were. Ferguson in his book, now we know about Ferguson, Rock of Gibraltar, that's a whole different thing we'll get into much later. But we know in his book he felt badly underpaid by Manchester United, to the point George Graham actually gives him a copy of his contract and said, so you can take that in and show them what I'm on. Brian Clough, people say there was a change in him after Leeds, because after Leeds he was financially secure. At Leeds he got the payoff and he got to keep the mayor and he could buy his house. And then suddenly he was different. Because these are working class guys, they are. They have come through a time when they earn good money, but not enough to retire, right? It's why footballers have second lives, pubs generally, right? Pubs, or try to stay in the game. Financial security and it's getting bigger for these guys because they're looking at players now who are earning money. And it kind of doesn't surprise me that they felt entitled to some of the money that was washing through football. if someone is willing to give you that, and I'm sure you can justify it to yourself because you can say, well, actually, I like him as a player anyway. I probably would have signed him. This is just a bonus. This is just nice. There's a lot of people are making money on this deal. Arsenal are getting a good player. What am I doing wrong? You can justify it to yourself. It doesn't make it right, but you can. But if your best defence is he happened to give me £425,000 30 years ago, I wouldn't buy that now with all the money that's in football. I certainly wasn't buying it then. And I think, to your point about Graham's subsequent career, the stench did stick. It was always there. When his team got a bad result, there was a joke about it. There was always going to be that. And he was a diminished figure. Whether he felt he was or he didn't, he was a diminished figure after Arsenal. And it is sad because I remember that George Graham, particularly after the second title, that one in 91, and you just thought, here is a guy that commands this league. And he was cool and he looked great and he was so assured. And it's a sad ending, but it's all right saying they were all out to get me. You gave them a lot to get you with.
Yeah, he did. So Arsenal trying, as I said, to get the season back on with those 3 signings. A huge signing in January, David. That, of course, was Tony Yeboah to Leeds, which will be a bigger deal next year. But really, the big signing at the start of January, out of nowhere, not trailed for weeks, not a saga that lasts all summer and then into the new season. Finally, the deal's done. This is a teletext job where you're not quite sure what you're reading, because it was in the evening time or late afternoon or whatever it was that the news broke that Newcastle United, who saw themselves as a challenger for a title, certainly saw that on their immediate horizon. That was an aim. I could see Blackburn obviously thinking along the same lines. Like Blackburn, they didn't have 2 right enough, but they had a goal machine, the hottest prospect in town, young player of the year, I think, the season before, Andy Cole, obviously, and he has started this season on fire as well. And incredibly, they chose to sell him to Manchester United. That in itself was hard to can understand. £7 million, David. And even for you and I, supporting a club at the time who were no strangers to spending money and who saw themselves as being on a par with Manchester United, that was a different level, a different ball game. £7 million in the one season seemed big. On one player in January was really unthinkable. So you've got that. You've again got this, and Keith Gillespie, obviously, the player, part of the deal. And bless Keegan. He's got two kind of moments in front of the camera. One, the camera's picking him up, addressing the support outside St James's Park with his, roll neck top on and saying, look, ultimately, if I get this wrong, it will be on me, but I've made big calls before and I had to come and speak to you about those in the past and they turned out all right, and kind of trust me, really. I know what I'm doing. And Keith Gillespie, I think he did believe in Keith Gillespie for sure, that he was a player of the future. And then there's an interview on the training ground. You don't see enough of that these days, by the way. Yeah. Just players getting pulled off the training ground to stand beside it and speak to cameras while there's other bits and pieces going on.
Balls flying,
and he kind of said, aye. And he's like, everyone's forgetting Keith Gillespie and all this, and he was key. I wouldn't have done this. I was adamant. If Keith Gillespie was not part of this deal, it wouldn't have happened. It would. Manchester United cucked them. There's an Alan Partridge feel to that, really, that yes, this guy, he's going to sleep with my wife whenever he wants, but I do get to use his Volvo once a month. And let me tell you, if that Volvo was not on the table, I would not have agreed to that arrangement. There's just something about it that doesn't quite feel like a genuine trade with two parties of equal weight. They've had their pants pulled down. They've been bullied, and that not enough's talked about this. I don't think it was huge at the time, and then, well, maybe there's another story that we'll finish this episode with that kind of dominates the bandwidth of this season, and it maybe because it takes Cole a wee while to really get up and running and really fill his boots for United. But I mean, this was just stunning, David. Not quite, Morris Johnson stunning, but no one saw this coming.
There are two transfers in my life where I have been shocked upon reading them. And I don't mean, oh, he's gone there. I mean, oh my God, I need to talk to someone. I need to seek out people to let them know this news. One was when I was 11 years old, Morris Johnson signing for Rangers, which I found out via the front page of the newspaper. And the second was this, Andy Cole. Wasn't even my team. But again, like you, I got it. Evening Times it was for me. I found out I came home from work. I had a part-time job after school when I came home. And younger viewers, there used to be these things, first of all, called newspapers, but even more so, there was these things called evening papers, which, as the name suggests, would come to you with the day's news. And in a Scottish, it was the Glasgow Evening Times. They didn't really lead with English, they led with this. And I couldn't believe it. 1993, summer 1993, Manchester United break. The then British Rangers break it a few weeks later, but they break summer 93. So what? 18 months, right? 3.5 million for Roy Keane. 3.5 million. 18 months later, 7 million. In terms of what this was like, the only modern equivalent I can think of, this is the equivalent of the first day of the transfer window, waking up, an announcement coming out that Arsenal have signed Erling Haaland for double
200.
Yeah, the exact money. But also, alongside that, they've signed him for 200 million and Reece Nelson. That's the equivalent of it. And then it would be the equivalent of Pep saying, I wouldn't have done this deal if Reece Nelson wasn't a part of this. He's vital to this deal, Reece Nelson. Now, Gillespie was a better player than that, but he was a bit player at United, right? I'm joking slightly, but he was not a key player. Yeah, no, even if it'd been a Dennis Irwin, the Leeds thing, right? Yeah. I'd have got that a bit more. But you said it doesn't feel like an equal trade. It's not. Keith Gillespie's valued in this deal at 1 million. Newcastle will receive £6 million. So this is a make weight, right? There's no, and you might be pleased with the make weight, but it doesn't mean it's not a make weight.
You might have faith, which he did, in the potential of Keith Gillespie.
And Gillespie will do well for them.
He does well. He's trying to convince on those steps and on that training pitch, and in God knows how many phone conversations in the previous 24, 48 hours, he's trying to convince himself as much as he's trying to convince the Newcastle support that actually I can see the future. Because what is the wily thought process here? It's that Cole's a busted flush. He can't continue this. It's a purple patch. We're cashing in on that purple patch, which some clubs do, by the way. And by the way, for a wee while, it kind of looks like that may well be the case, that he's not quite got these boots on anymore, that he's had on for Newcastle, and maybe old Keggy saw something here that no one else did, and he's the smart one. But that's the only way you're selling that. I said, Cole's a busted flush. It's a purple patch. This boy's the future, and this will look at the canniest bit of business there's ever been. That must be how he sees it, or how he's trying to convince himself. No one else has obviously seen it at that time, and it's great when that happens, David, because they look like sages, right? The all-seeing, wise man. I don't think that's ever really been applied to dear old Keggy, but an incredible signing nonetheless. We're going to take a break. One more, David, on you go.
Cole was 23. You can't say purple patch busted. You can't, because it'd been going on for 2.5 years. You can maybe sell Andy. I know. You can maybe sell Andy Cole at this time to Italy, right? You can do that for $7 million.
That's a very different ballgame.
You cannot sell it. How can you possibly sell this? Not only your best player, but this phenom, right, to the club you're chasing, and then claim that this will help you get them? You can't. You can't.
That, and if he was on those steps saying, we've sold Andy Cole to Inter, it's really, we're disappointed to see him go. We love him. However, £6 million plus, we just couldn't turn that down. For the long-term benefit of Newcastle United, that's crazy. What did we spend on him? Come on. And the fans would have bought that because he's away. Out of sight, out of mind. It's the Manchester United thing, and that
he's going to be there, all the time.
Any pretensions of a genuine rivalry, even we'll talk about it next year. Obviously, I think they're completely undermined by this bit of business. Anyway, we'll be back after the break. We were actually going to talk about some football from 94-95. I'm going to just get that Cantona book, Davey, for that immortal quote. Just give me a minute.
Yeah, no problem. Are you sure we'll get any football in? Because
there's no much, mate, to be honest. It's that's the kind of good thing about this little period. It is all narrative stuff. Like, where the fuck is this?
See, if you had it on Kindle, mate, you could just search for it.
Shut up.
I'm just saying.
I do have Kindle, but
as Stephen Fry said, Kindle is no more a danger to books than elevators are to stairs.
I do have Kindle, just for books I'm not overly sure I'll like.
Surely for holidays, it's a lot easier than the old days when we used to take fucking 6 books in the suitcase.
Yeah. Here we go. Welcome back, listeners. We'll leave the controversy for a little bit because we've got some football to talk about. Just a few bits and pieces, David. The aforementioned Everton. Joe Royle comes back. He's got a Merseyside derby on the horizon, and it's a 2-0 win at Goodison, and Big Dunk creates his legend. Again, the worth of that legend and the overall value is a point of debate amongst Everton fans, I know, but this is where it starts. A goal and just an absolute menace. Like Paul Rideout scored the second, and they're off the bottom, and this obviously a symbolic and important victory and start for him.
Yeah, it really was. They were needing a hero, Martin. It was good timing for everybody. So you're right, though, because if you're talking about Everton heroes, I mentioned earlier Kendall and Harvey, Joe Royle as a player. But even in the 80s, that Everton team, wow, heroes, Ratcliffe, Stevens, Shearer, Southall, Bracewell, Reid, Gray, Sharp, Lineker, and I'll have missed some. Ferguson's not in that league. But at a time when there were very little other reasons to make you go to Goodison Park, he was one. And there is something in us, as British football fans, that a guy who patently loves the club, and he does, there's no doubt whatsoever about that, patently loves the club, angry when they sold him actually to Newcastle. Remember, he was genuinely upset about it. But also that big, committed, terrorising player. When you're getting beat off your rivals a lot, and Everton unfortunately do tend to get beat off their local rivals a lot, having a big guy that goes and smashes one of them does offer a compensatory. It's not as good as a win, but okay, you beat us, but one of your players is leaving the field with a broken nose does help. And Dunk was that type of player. It's a terrific goal, and as you say, it's the timing of it. And Dunk was very good for that throughout his career. Whenever the noise was getting a little bit much, he could pull something special out the bag. And would go in and do it. But at that time, Everton really needed something to believe in. And I think there was the thought, it is very 2+2, but logic. Joe Royle, big bustling striker for Everton. We remember Joe Royle, he was great. He had big bustling strikers at Oldham. He'll take this boy, he'll mould him. He's the ideal father figure for this kid.
Indeed, that makes perfect sense, and I'm a big fan of football logic, David. It shouldn't be not as simple as it may be. Blackburn, we mentioned last week, a nice winter. They run a big run. They beat Southampton 3-2 at Ewood Park, but they're not even remembered for that one because Matt Le Tissier is just doing Matt Le Tissier things quite a lot at this point in time, and that goal, that particular match was just ridiculous.
Tim Flowers did well to come back and have a career after that, Martin, because that would have ended many a mortal. He could do ridiculous things. We've spoken about this before, and we will speak about it again lots, but it was perfect for Matt Le Tissier to be there. There is a bit of me that goes, I wish I'd seen him at Manchester United, whatever. But the modern day equivalent, we all know what would happen. Chelsea would buy him and he'd play 25 minutes and he'd never be the same again after it. So there was something sweet about him being at Southampton where there wasn't the pressure on him every week. There wasn't the huge discussion. And you weren't, with all due respect, turning on Match of the Day to see Southampton. But when Le Tissier would pop up with something special, the thing about him is he did the extraordinary so regularly that after a while that you're like, this is not just, that's the greatest goal that boy will ever score. But the thing I love particularly about this goal, and I know that everyone watching will have seen it, is Tim Flowers, after he tries to sort of recover his poison diction, and he just looks up as much as, what just happened to me, right? What can I be expected to do about that? And it actually adds to it because it's almost poignant. That it's just a case of, I am a very good goalkeeper and there was absolutely nothing on this planet I could have done about that. It was an extraordinary piece of work. But people forget they lost the game. And at another club, that goal doesn't get remembered. Manchester United fans don't celebrate that goal, if you know what I mean, because
no, absolutely not.
They lost the game.
They absolutely did. Yeah. What else have we got? Well, the next week after that, United play Nottingham Forest at Old Trafford and lose 2-1. And yet again, Davy, Stan Collingwood is all over that United side. He scores a brilliant goal, and there's no question that Bergie kind of wanted him, but that obviously just never happened. But that meant that Blackburn went top of the table. They went 2 points clear that particular weekend. Ironic new year. Arsenal lose, I think, at home to QPR 3-1. But John Jensen, the man, the subject of the end of the House of Graham, who has been brought in after scoring the winning goal in the European Championship final. He's been here since 1992, has not scored, curls in an absolute beauty just as the whole thing's about to fall on its arse. So there is sporting irony at its absolute best. And irony just keeps coming because not long after the Cole transfer, David, Manchester United go to St James's Park. Andy Cole doesn't play. Keith Gillespie doesn't play. It's 1-1. Mark Hughes puts United ahead and gets clattered for his trouble and gets taken off. Paul Kitson, again, who Keegan may have huge hopes in leading that particular Newcastle line, does equalise. So again, points dropped. But the biggest game of the season, really, given the situation, was Old Trafford on the 22nd of January, and it's Manchester United against Blackburn Rovers. Tense game, I think, is one way of putting it. Cole is through and goal, David, quite early on in its week, and it reminded me quite a lot. Talked about Mo Johnson earlier when he went back to Parkhead for Rangers and put through and goal twice, and just nowhere near that kind of deadly finishing that eventually we would come used to, and Scottish football fans had been used to. There's a few. Shearer's not absolutely on his game either. There's quite a few chances being missed. It's a nervy game. 10 minutes to go. Henning Berg tries to usher the ball out the park, and when he just should have leveled it, Ryan Giggs robs him. A delightful cross to the back post. There's one man who's not going to miss that and keep his cool, and of course it's Eric Cantona into the roof of the net. 10 minutes to go. United have the 3 points. Possibly shouldn't. A late Blackburn raid, cross ball. Shearer heads it back across the box for Tim Sherwood to head in. Shearer is adjudged to have pushed Roy Keane in doing so. I mean, possibly, but there's not a lot in it. Sherwood's goal is chopped off, and I mean, Kenny Dalglish just handles it with that kind of characteristic grace and class after it. No, he doesn't. It's not particularly coherent. He's not overly coherent at the best of times, but it's basically, that's twice now. I'm told these things even themselves out. We'll see, blah blah blah, and that was the little wobble for Blackburn. They'd lost 2 in a row, and he's asked about that, and such a defensive man. I mean, he's so snippy with reporters. I mean, they're just also doing their job. It's a valid question. We've got a game in hand, okay, we'll see just how that bottle and composure is kept as the season kind of goes. But that really was a massive game, David, and a sign. Here we go. United will step up. They are not quite at the best, nowhere near as good as they were last season, the season before, but they will still not top, by the way. Blackburn will still top at the end of this game, and with that game in hand that Dalglish mentioned, but that's twice they've met, home and away now, and United have won both.
Yeah, because I thought United are the better side and they're going to win the league, and they've just added Andy Cole, and okay, he's taking a wee bit to settle in, but it will come and they'll run away with it now. That's what I thought. It wasn't an outrageous thought. I will defend myself on that one. I played them twice, I beat them twice. They are defending champions. I think that, Dalglish and Ferguson were never friends. I think we can safely say. And they both want to win this league. Ferguson, with his mind games and his Dalglish was doing that before. Dalglish was never slow to stir up a hornet's nest. Ferguson gets, because football was invented in 1992, as we are actually helping to prove. But Dalglish knew when to drop a bomb. Plus the fact that I know what I'm like after my team lose and people don't shove a mic in my face.
If you've got a grievance.
Yeah, and I think they do have a legit grievance here. Is that a foul? Maybe, but it's the old doesn't get given at the other end. And if I'm Blackburn, I am convinced it doesn't. So
it's probably starting to become a thing now.
It's starting to become a thing. But it's in the ether. It's certainly being discussed in the back rooms of pubs after matches such as this. But I think there is a sense of they get everything. And it's so frustrating because psychologically, they haven't beaten Man United, right? Okay, and they're not going to. But if they get a win, they get a late draw there, then psychologically that's massive. Coming from behind.
5 points clear with a game in hand if that goal. And you don't
then at that point, you're thinking, so it is a big goal and it is a big decision. And we don't know. I think I know you're always big on this. I don't think you can look at that and say it's a total howler by the ref.
No, there's contact.
There
And
is
Shearer's
contact.
combative. It's not quite as bad as his dig at the Argentina goalkeeper and San Etienne a few years later, but there's something there. But yeah, managers will make the most out of that to put pressure on key moments that are still to come. That's the game. So United are 2 points behind. Blackburn have got a game in hand. United have a game in midweek. Blackburn do not, and that game is at Selhurst Park against Crystal Palace. A Crystal Palace side who are thundering into challenges all night. It is a bad-tempered, testy game. David May puts Manchester United ahead. So they will go top of the table if they win, although Blackburn will get 2 games in hand. Gareth Southgate pulls one back. Looking at it just like that, okay, 2 more points dropped. That's annoying if you're a United fan, but maybe not completely fatal. The other small detail came at the start of the second half, of course, when Eric Cantona was correctly sent off, even though he would have a case for the lack of attention shown to some of the tackles that were coming his way that night. And as we know, walking off, there's an interaction with a supporter, and any
Matthew Simmons.
Matthew Simmons, I'll get to Mr.
Seared
Simmons
in my mind.
But he goes in with a kung fu kick, and wow! I again go back to teletext. That's a Wednesday night, and why I remember this. I think my pal gave me a loan of a Super Nintendo or something just to kind of try out. I was maybe going to buy it with my Christmas money that was sitting burning a hole in my pocket. I hadn't been used yet, and I had the radio on maybe, and maybe teletext on or something, and something's happened here. Like this is big, and we'll see on Sports Night or whatever it would have been called then, and on a Wednesday evening we'd see the kind of footage, and my goodness, this is incredible. It just doesn't happen. Players sometimes maybe shout back, but they're so used to just kind of cocooning themselves off from that kind of abuse, which happens all the time. This had just never been seen before. What are the FA going to do? That's all still to come. The best part about this, by far, when the police interviewed Matthew Simmons again, they said, "Look, tell us what you said." He said, "Off, off, off. Go on, Cantona. Have an early shower." As if he was just talking like one of those supporters in those kind of 60s, 70s football comics.
He apparently... he apparently had joined the crowd at Melchester Rovers.
Yes, indeed.
With that one.
But another witness, who was there as a neutral, quotes Simmons as shouting instead, "You fucking cheating French cunt. Fuck off back to France, you motherfucker. French bastard. Wanker." So 2 different accounts. Yes. Maybe there's something in the middle. We'll save the footballing impact on the season till next week. Yeah. But the noise around this, understandably, was huge. And the press conference, Davey, I mean, it is literally immortal. The sweater was the least of the kind of takeaways, I think, from that particular presser. The whole nation's football press waiting for what? A mea culpa. I'm really sorry. I was provoked into this. It's a 10th stage, and some nonsense about seagulls and trawlers and sardines and offie fucks, as cool as all hell. And there is the kind of tabloid reaction. This is disgrace. He needs to throw the book at him, which we'll get to next week happens. But there's also quite a lot of this is actually very funny for a start, and these pricks need a bit of their own medicine,
This is where the counterculture that we've discussed on previous shows comes to bear. Fantasy football treat this as if it's absolutely hilarious. They think it's all over, which had started at this point. They treat this like this is just funny. I was 17-year-old indie alternative music kid, right? NME treated him like a fucking hero, right? The punk rock football. This was amazing. The reason that this is so fucking fantastic, and I'm not going to sit here, by the way, and tell you anything other, so go to a different pod if you want condemnation of it. No other footballer reacts, right? They don't. But if any other footballer, or you or I, or anybody watching, are walking past Matthew Simmons, and by the way, any British person who uses the words motherfucker is for the watching. But you or I might slap him. We may punch him. It would not occur to a single one of us to do a standing fucking drop kick over the advertising hoardings chest high on him. There's the famous picture. It's the woman's face stood next to Simmons. It captures it. That was what made it. Had he just punched him, it would not have had, I think, the resonance that it did. It was so stupendously over the top. He would have been in trouble, but it wouldn't have been a counterculture resonance.
No, it wouldn't. He probably wouldn't have got to him if he wanted to punch him.
You or I would have tried to leap over and had a go. But it's the cold calculation to go, I am going to do this. And to be able to pull it off, by the way, that's not easy unless you're trained as a professional wrestler. I have tried a standing drop kick and it's almost impossible. But
and the black kit as well. It's just something.
Great. The yellow ribbon.
Yeah.
You know Band Ash? They released a single.
My wife's favorite.
Months later. All right. Well, they released a single a couple of months later called Kung Fu. What was the cover?
Yeah.
Right. And again, that's part of crossover we've been discussing throughout this that what didn't exist before. Footballers like Shaddy and Lionel Richie. And all of a sudden, this is, there is this crossover. And as I say, NME, Music Melody Maker, they're giving it big. Oh, the punk rock football, this is amazing. This is so cool. What it did do as well for the first time was, I think, because of the stuff we've discussed about the Premier League want a different audience. And they're hypocritical because they love the fact that Palace game, it was mental in there. Sellers Park is brilliant, still is. Right? But it was feral that night and it makes a great product. Okay, it's like the darts. It makes a great product, but there is this sense of, well, actually, they do get to say what they like, and some of it is vile, and yet we're all now. I hope it goes without saying, you cannot be a footballer and go around hitting supporters, right? You can't go around hitting anybody, right? So on behalf of And It's Live and the team here at And It's Live, may I just say, please do not go out and hit people. And but you can any scope.
Have a go back verbally. Then I think it's absolutely fine because that's what fans hate when players start giving it a bit back. They don't like that kind of shit.
I hate that. I hate. See when people complain about a footballer cup in their ear or I mean to their own team I get, but any gesture, and it's like, mate, I've been sitting next to you, you've been calling that guy's parentage into question for the last hour, and now he's ran past you and he smiled. I've seen people lose their shit at that after somebody scored. We need to grow up a little bit here, and that was the first I remember this debate coming.
Yeah.
However, like you, I hadn't seen the game. I was going to watch the highlights, but News at 10 was on first and they led clearly with this. So then, like you, switch over, can't wait, BBC One. And I was just agog, Martin. I was just, and my immediate reaction, which is why I'm not going to criticise for once, the reaction from the traditional, the tabloids and whatnot, is I remember me and my dad sitting going, don't have to ban him. He's done. I mean, I don't, he can maybe play football somewhere else, but they can't let him play in England because it was that shocking.
David.
Exactly, which sounds, and within a few days we'd calmed down, and we'll not make the decision, I'd like to point out, but I think the thing that did it was when the police got involved. That's when I felt a lot of kind of, I wouldn't say sympathy, because there's EBU is a thing by this stage, I think. But there was a bit of, come on, that's a bit much, right? He was clearly provoked. You shouldn't be jailing the guy for this. And I think that there was then a whole... Plus, I remember a lot of broadsheet columnists who were clearly wanting to write their generation's Who Breaks a Butterfly on a Wheel. Where you're writing about this like it was the Dreyfus case with Cantona. So, yeah, if they didn't want to be Rees Mogg, they wanted to be Emile Zola. But it was such an incredible incident, and it still is. I mean, it still doesn't lose its propensity to shock people the first time they see it, because it's so out of the ordinary, it's so extraordinary. But yes, my initial thought was he is absolutely done, certainly in British football.
We'll find out next week just how lengthy that suspension is going to be, the impact it's going to have on the title race, where nerves are spilled all over the place right up until the final minute of the season. That and a few other bits and pieces. Remember, the big drop for 4 clubs next week. Thank you, David.
An absolute pleasure, mate. I mean, I don't think we'll ever have an episode like this again. I mean, we'll have plenty of talking points throughout the series, but that was extraordinary, and it came within a 3-month period. How unbelievable.
Yeah. Should point out a friend and podcaster colleague who's joined us a few times, Rob Fletcher, has a brilliant book on this particular season and all of that controversy. So go and dig that out. But until next time, promise you more football next week. Bye for now. Welcome to And It's Live, the podcast which dives deep into football's most iconic seasons, stories, and what ifs. If you love football, history, tactics, and nostalgia, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and drop us a like on YouTube so you don't miss an episode. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. On YouTube, search for And It's Live Podcast. We've got new deep dives, drafts, and breakdowns dropping every other day.